Cameo Cinema was built as a Welsh chapel in 1887. The cinema was situated on the corner of Webster Road and Bird Street, Wavertree, Liverpool. It was without a street number, as churches were not given a number, but it was next door to 92 Webster Road. On the 4th of March 1926, a cinematographic license was granted to John F. Wood, managing director of Bedford Cinemas Limited. It is presumed that the building started business as the new Cameo Picture House on or near this date. Many small cinemas like the Cameo were dotted around the Liverpool suburbs at this time to enable residents to see movies without having to make the long journey into the city centre. The strong architectural features of the building could hardly be disguised as those of a chapel. Except for a square extension that had been built onto the left-hand side of the frontage that provided an entrance, little more was done to alter the appearance of the chapel. A basic shallow box canopy with the name Cameo, which was supported by slender pillars, covered the set of 5 steps, which were divided by a handrail, leading customers through 2 pairs of glazed panelled doors. Another larger sign was positioned on the main building, which faced onto Webster Road. Beyond the entrance doors was a small foyer where the pay box was positioned. The manager's office consisted of a partition that had been built during the conversion from a church to a picture house. There were about 200 seats at the cinema. On the night of 19th of March 1969, a Saturday evening, people in Liverpool were enjoying a night out at the Cameo Cinema, watching a film called Bond Street. Coincidentally, the film was about a double murder and starred 2 well-known actors of the time, Jean Kent and Roland Young. As the cinema-goers left to return home, Leonard Thomas, aged 44, the manager of the Cameo Cinema, and John Bernard Catterall, aged 30, his assistant, were in the manager's office on the first floor of the building, counting the confectionery takings. Shortly after 9:30 p.m., the cashier came in with the ticket takings in a blue cloth bag. They amounted to 50.8s in cash, mostly in notes. She stayed about 3 to 4 minutes and left to go to the staff room. A masked man had entered the cinema and demanded the money, and there was a struggle during which the man shot both Leonard Thomas and John Catterall and fled without the money. The money bag that had been used to take the money upstairs from the cash office to the manager's office was there, but it was empty, and across the floor were some cash boxes that had been disturbed and money strewn across the floor. When the gunman entered the office, Leonard Thomas was alone, and John Catterall entered afterward, likely after the gunman had already shot Leonard. While in the office, Leonard and John reportedly refused to give the gunman the money, prompting him to fire 3 shots at them, which resulted in their deaths. He then fired 3 shots at the lock, perhaps believing it was locked, in an attempt to escape before fleeing the scene. Presumably, the gunman had run off. He had done so in a panic. The description of the man circulated shortly after the murder on 21st March was that he was of medium build with a pale, rather full face and with dark hair. He had been wearing a brown tweed overcoat, which was double-breasted and with a belt that had been tied all around. He had had black shoes and a trilby hat with the front brim pulled down. Leonard Thomas and John Catterall's post-mortems were carried out on 28th of March at the Smithdown Road Hospital. The post-mortem examination on Leonard Thomas showed that he had a superficial abrasion about 3 inches long under his left arm, which could have been caused by a bullet travelling along the surface of the arm towards the chest, the arm being raised from the side of the chest at the time. The pathologist said that there was an entry wound in the mid-axillary line of the left side of the chest, between the 4th and 5th ribs, with no evidence of an exit wound. He said that both the 4th and 5th ribs on the left side were fractured around the entry, due, in his opinion, to the passage of the bullet between the ribs, and said that the 7th dorsal vertebra of his spinal column was fractured due to the bullet having passed through it. He said that the wound was in direct line with the entry wound. He went on to say that there was a fracture of the 7th rib on the right side, 2 inches from the vertebral column, which was, in his opinion, caused by the same bullet as it left the chest, and said that he then found the bullet lying in the muscles of the back of the chest over the seventh rib on the right side. He added that in its passage through the chest, the bullet had lacerated both lungs. He concluded that death was due to shock and hemorrhage due to the laceration of the lungs by the bullet. The pathologist next carried out the post-mortem on John Catterall and found several bullet wounds on the right side of his body. One bullet went through his right hand from the back, but it didn't stay there, and some bones in his hand were broken. There was a bullet entry wound above his right collarbone, which caused a fracture in that area. The bullet then left his body after hitting the collarbone, about 9 inches below where it entered, and caused a minor injury to his right lung. He also found a bullet entry wound toward the back of his chest on the right side, which he believed was fatal. This bullet broke the 9th rib, passed through the right lung, and did significant damage to the liver. The pathologist found the bullet lodged at the top of his right thigh and removed it. He concluded that John Catterall died from shock and bleeding caused by the liver injury from the bullet. He noted that the wound that had killed John Catterall could have been inflicted when he was either lying down or when he was in a kneeling position, because it was a wound due to the entry of a bullet which passed in at the back, and then it took a downward course, because it passed through the lung and liver, and finally ended up at the top of his right thigh. The bullets that were recovered were all 9mm. There were 6 in total, 3 that had been fired at Leonard Thomas and Bernard Catterall, and 3 that had been fired at the lock. The police investigation revealed few leads following the murders, and it was not until 4th of April 1949 that 2 convicted criminals, a labourer and a woman, wrote a letter to the police implicating George Kelly and Charles Connolly. On the 6th of May 1949, a 22-year-old window cleaner was arrested on the charge that, well knowing that a man known to you had murdered Leonard Thomas on March 19th, you did, on the same day and other days afterwards, receive, comfort, harbour, assist, and maintain that said man. He had been seen at the police office in Park Road, Liverpool, where he made a statement saying that he had been asked to take part in a hold-up at the Cameo Cinema, but that he did not want to commit an offence in which a gun was to be used. He then went on to say that after the murder, he had met the man who committed the crime and had received the gun used, but that as a result of a promise to the man, he could not disclose where the gun was hidden or the identity of the man. The window cleaner was described as being slimly built and of medium height with a shock of long fair hair. He had been wearing a brown pinstripe suit and a light-belted raincoat. He had been arrested the previous Monday night after what was described as extensive police inquiries and charged the following day. He was said to have told the police, "If you don't charge me, I will get the gun for you tonight." Although both George Kelly and Charles Connolly had alibis for the night of the murders and claimed that they had never met before, they were charged and tried, it being said that George Kelly had been the gunman, whilst Charles Connolly had been a lookout, both having planned the robbery. However, it was noted that there were no witnesses who could state that they had seen a lookout. Charles Connolly said that he had been at a church hall dance with his wife, and George Kelly said that he had been drinking in the Lee Arms public house. George Kelly said that he had been drinking most of the day in the Lee Arms pub, and a number of witnesses corroborated his story. It was further claimed that he had been quite drunk, and that the witnesses to the murder had claimed that the gunman had been quite able and not visibly drunk at all. A woman who had lived in Pengwern Grove in Liverpool and who had been employed at the Cameo Cinema as an usherette and relief cashier said that she had taken over the duties of cashier on the 12th of March 1949, and that on the evening of 19th of March 1949 that she had commenced duty in the cash desk at 5 p.m. The cash desk was noted as being at the front or the Webster Road entrance to the cinema. She remained there on duty at the cash desk until about 9:30 p.m. She said that there was an electric light in the cash office and that was left on until she left the office. At about 9:35 p.m., when she turned it off and took a bag of money with her, containing roughly £50 to the manager's office, going off through the hall, out of a side entrance into a lobby and then up a spiral staircase. She noted that there was another woman on duty at the Bird Street side and that she spoke to her on her way, and then, when she reached the office, she handed the bag of money over to Leonard Thomas, the manager. She added that John Catterall, the assistant manager, was also in the office with Leonard Thomas at the time. She said she handed over a bag of money and went to the staff room. Shortly after, she heard a bang from the operating box and with another woman discovered a stranger with a gun emerging from the manager's office. The armed man threatened them before fleeing. A fireman, who usually escorts the cashier, was outside putting up bills and did not accompany her that night. After hearing the commotion, he investigated and was confronted by the armed man, whom he chased but lost. He returned to find the telephone line cut and the manager, Leonard Thomas, and the assistant, John Catterall, wounded. Other staff members, including a salesgirl and a supervisor, also confirmed hearing gunshots, witnessing the aftermath, and finding the wounded men in the manager's office. The wife of a man who lived on Webster Road in Liverpool, who was an usherette at the cinema, said that on 19th of March 1949, she was working at the cinema on duty at the exit door leading to Bird Street. She said that at about 9:30 p.m., she saw the cashier girl come through the auditorium towards where she was, saying that she handed her 2 papers and smiled and then walked on. She said that she then walked through the auditorium to the front of the cinema to speak to another usherette. She said that whilst she was talking to the other usherette, about 5 minutes after she had seen the cashier girl walk past, she heard 3 shots. She said that she took it that they had come from the Bird Street end of the cinema, which she said was more or less below the manager's office. She said that when she heard the 3 shots, she walked through the cinema to the door leading to the foyer, and that a man then rushed out through a swinging door at the bottom of the spiral staircase. She said that he had a scarf over his face, noting that it seemed to be all over his face and that he was wearing a brown overcoat that she thought had a belt on it. She said that he had his left hand in his pocket and that he was pushing the door as he was going out and that he went out into Bird Street and that the fireman then followed him down and went out through the same door and then out of sight. A cinema operator who lived in Coronado Street in Liverpool, who worked at the Cameo Cinema, said that on the night of 19th of March 1949 that he had been engaged in the cellar of the cinema when his attention was attracted by 3 bangs coming from upstairs. He said that the cellar was below the spiral staircase and that when he heard the bangs that he went up the spiral staircase to the top, which was outside the manager's office, and then saw a man come out of the manager's office carrying a gun in his right hand, noting that the gun had a black long barrel. He said that he also saw the fireman there on the landing, and that the man pointed the gun at the fireman and said something to them, and then ran down the spiral staircase. He said that the fireman followed the men down, and that he followed the fireman, and that they then went out into Bird Street after the man, and saw him running off up Bird Street. He said that he then returned to the manager's office, where he saw the manager and the assistant manager both lying wounded. Johnson, the window cleaner, was acquitted on a technicality on the first day of his trial. His defense counsel successfully argued that his statements were inadmissible after the police had promised to grant bail in another case. The police had a signed statement from an inmate of Walton Prison claiming that Johnson boasted about being the lookout for his brother during the botched cinema robbery. That was now useless. Johnson could never be questioned or tried again for the Cameo murders. The detective in charge of the case was Herbert Balmer, a man whose philosophy was, when stuck in a hole you have dug, dig even deeper. A number of his investigations would later turn out to be reliant on shaky, perhaps concocted, evidence. He had been made Detective Chief Inspector the year of the Cameo murders and went on to be appointed Acting Chief Constable of Liverpool. He initiated an extensive manhunt for the killer, but it yielded few leads until several months later, when a letter arrived from 2 convicted criminals, a prostitute and her pimp, Jacqueline Dixon and James Northam. Dixon and Northam offered to provide the police with information about the murders in exchange for immunity from prosecution. This development rekindled interest in the cases of Charles Connolly and George Kelly. They stood trial at Liverpool Assizes in the city's St George's Hall on 12th of January 1950 before Mr Justice Rowland Oliver. The prosecution's case was that Kelly had been the gunman and that Connolly had acted as a lookout as well as having planned the robbery. In his evidence, Northam alleged that he and Dixon had been present in the Beehive public house in Mount Pleasant with the defendants when they were plotting the crime, had seen Kelly loading a pistol, and that Kelly had borrowed his, Northam's, overcoat for use as a disguise during the robbery. Dixon stated that Kelly had borrowed a dark scarf or apron to use as a mask, trying it on in front of the customers of the crowded pub before he and Connolly boarded a tram to take them to the Edge Hill area. No other witnesses to this action were ever found. Northam claimed he had originally planned to assist in the robbery, but the sight of the gun had frightened him off. A shocking evidence of Robert Graham, a criminal from Preston serving time in Walton Prison while Kelly and Connolly were remanded there, garnered significant attention. He claimed to have relayed messages between the two prisoners, although this seemed unnecessary since their cells, equipped with barred doors, were close enough for them to talk freely. Graham also alleged that both men had confessed to him about their involvement in the murders in the exercise yard, a claim they denied. As a result of his testimony, Graham received a sentence reduction. Forensic analysis of the crime scene and the trajectory of the bullet wounds suggested that the shooter had used their left hand. A fireman who saw the gunman exit through the fire door noted that he kept his left hand, likely holding the gun, in his pocket, even though Kelly was right-handed. After one of the longest murder trials in British legal history, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, leading to a retrial with the defendants being tried separately. Much was made of the question of where Charles Connolly had been at the time of the shooting, as it was said that his role was that of a lookout. However, he was not seen near the cinema, and the sequence of events tended to preclude him having played any role as lookout, as he neither warned George Kelly of John Catterall's arrival at the manager's office, nor appeared to have been standing ready at the emergency exit, which the gunman had trouble opening. This led to the question of how the gunman entered the cinema, the conclusion being that he must have either gone through the auditorium from the main entrance, or that there had been an accomplice who had opened the emergency exit from the inside in advance. The telephone wires at the Cameo Cinema had been cut at the foot of the spiral staircase, and the police had to be called by a resident, although they arrived quickly. However, no explanation was put forward for who cut them and when. The issue of the cut wires is further complicated when considering the evidence of Northam, Dixon, and Graham, none of whom detailed the issue in the planning. In particular, if the robbery had been planned in the Beehive Hotel earlier in the evening, then it might have been reasonable to consider that the conversation would have addressed the need or intention to cut the phone wires and whether anyone had a tool that could be cut with. Nor is the cutting of the telephone wires detailed in Northam's subsequent conversation in the following days with George Kelly, when he allegedly explained what happened. The omission of this fact that only the murderer would have known, and which was either not reported in the newspapers, or only reported in the most extensive coverage, being a significant part of the robbery that would have taken time, of which there were only a few minutes from start to finish, undermines the veracity of Northam, Dixon, and Graham's subsequent accounts of George Kelly's alleged confessions. According to some speculations, Balmer tried to cover this aspect by having Northam and Dixon state Kelly also produced a pair of pliers in the Beehive, but he was told by more senior officers that this was too far-fetched, would be over-egging the pudding, and to drop it. Thus it never appeared in any of their further changed statements. Kelly was tried first, and despite a spirited defense by Rose Heilbronn, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. The judge was Mr. Justice Cassels. Connolly was then offered the chance to plead guilty to conspiracy and being an accessory. Faced with the almost certainty that he would otherwise be convicted of murder and share the fate of his co-accused if he refused, He had little choice other than to accept the offer and plead accordingly. Contrary to popular belief, Connolly did not turn King's evidence, but simply pleaded guilty to the charges laid before him. His plea, however, destroyed Kelly's assertions of his own innocence, and despite an appeal against his conviction, Kelly was executed at Walton Prison, Liverpool, by Albert Pierrepoint and his assistant Harry Allen on 28th of March 1950. He continued to assert his innocence, even on the scaffold. Connolly was released from prison in 1957 and died in 1997. Shortly before his death, he took part in an interview on BBC Radio Merseyside, during which he reaffirmed both his and Kelly's innocence. Mr. Justice Cassells was the judge at the second trial. After the convictions were handed down, he commended Northam and Dixon and awarded them £30 each for their selfless role in the case, and also commended Graham, although he could not reward him directly under his powers. Cassells said, but for their evidence, George Kelly and Charles Connolly, two dangerous criminals, might never have been brought to justice. Whatever their previous faults might have been, they, by their actions in the case, and at the risk to their personal safety, had rendered a service to the community. The case generated significant concern within legal circles for many years, leading to multiple attempts to reopen it. The prosecution's evidence came from witnesses of questionable character. Dixon was a convicted prostitute and thief who, 2 years after the Cameo trial, received a lengthy prison sentence for violently robbing several of her clients. Northam had been a criminal since age 14, spending much of the 1940s in and out of prison, while Graham had a similar background. All three had motives to benefit from their testimonies. Detective Chief Inspector Herbert Balmer, who led the investigation, struggled to corroborate much of the prosecution's evidence during the trial, and several witness statements showed signs of police coaching. Additionally, employer timesheets detailing Connolly's movements on the day of the murder had been poorly altered. The police also withheld witness statements that could have favored the accused, a fact later uncovered by local businessman Luigi Santangeli, who investigated the crime on Connolly's behalf in the 1990s and gained access to the case files from Merseyside police.